Hello, everybody. My name is Max. Thank you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate y'all spending your time here learning in Figma. I'm super excited that everybody wants to further their skills, learn new stuff, and have some fun along the way. So welcome, and let's get started. All right. So like Kaizen said before, feel free to jump in with any questions you have along the way. If you're curious about anything, just drop it in the chat. If you need me to clarify whatever you need, just ask for it, and our moderators will interrupt me if we need to. And at the end, if we have time, we'll do a Q&A. So, animating prototype transitions. Today, this is what we're going to be talking about, doing this in Figma. So, we're going to talk about how to animate. We're going to talk about the importance of layer naming. We're going to go through easing, what it is, how you use it. We're going to spend the majority of our time actually building out some animations. If you want to jump ahead a little bit right now, in the email, you should have gotten an email that has a link to some Figma, a Figma file that you can access. If you don't have that link, I can drop it for you in the chat and you can access it here. We've got this file here for you so that you can view community page. So you can jump into that link, click this duplicate button over here, and it will open up in your Figma. It's a non-destructive thing, so your copy of this is another copy. You can follow along. No one else is going to see what you're doing unless you share it with them, and it's not going to affect the original file. So that is in the chat right here. Figma file. Boom. It's also in the email I sent to you guys just before we started. All right. So, animating. A lot of times when I look at files that, we prepared this file, that file, and third file, a lot of people will just be like, okay, cool. So we have this one and click, and then we've got the second one and click, and here's the third one. Today, we're going to work on how to make those move like they're alive and move like they have actual animations built into them. You can do that all within Figma. And I'll show you an example of that in a few minutes. So don't rush out of your seats to see that now. I'll be with you in just a second. All right. So when you click on any element in your design, you're going to see this design panel over here that we're used to now, especially if you've been to the last two Figma events that we've thrown, which is how to do the basics of Figma and then how to build with the design system. We're going to continue forward with some of those design system components. Some of those design system components are from Shopify Polaris, and we have a few custom ones in there as well. And we are going to be building with those today. So if you were at any of the previous events, you know that this design panel here is where you can lock proportions, you can change the rounding of corners, you can do all kinds of other things. But right above that, you've got this prototype and inspect. To the right, you've got inspect, and that's a really helpful thing for your developers. When you click on it, it'll show you all kinds of different stuff. You can just copy and paste your code. Super helpful. We're not going to touch that today. We're going to jump into this prototyping section. You can add interactions in a bunch of different ways. One thing before we kind of get started and get further into this is I want to acknowledge that over the last few days, Figma released some really cool things with component variables that can be alive inside of your prototype. I'm not going to touch the components or variables or the auto layout at all today. Each one of those classes would be like an hour long at least, and we have an hour today to cover a whole lot of stuff. So I definitely recommend using components and variables. There's all kinds of really cool Boolean functions which you can add in layer naming. Super helpful, super quick, really awesome, very powerful stuff. But we're not going to cover that today because of the scope of what we're doing. Today we're going to cover some basics of how to animate and make that stuff look really cool, really fast. All right, so we're going to get rid of these animations here, and we're going to show you some brand new ones. All right, cool. So let's pretend that this, let's delete that. All right, cool. So we've got these three screens, totally made up screens. We can see that, I probably wouldn't submit any kind of app design that looks like this necessarily. Could be cool, but we're gonna do some really basic things here and then move into a really more real looking screen. We've got 3 elements per screen. We'll jump into that design tab. We've got 1, 2, and 3 called eyebrow, nose, and mouth. Over here in the layers panel on the left, you've got eyebrow, nose, and mouth. And I'm going to delete that, copy and paste you right back in there. So each one of these has the same layer name, and that's really important. And we're going to talk about why in a second. So first thing we're going to do in order to start manipulating the relationships between these 3 things, we're going to click on the first one that we want to start with and jump into prototype. That's going to bring up this little blue box. You can grab this button here. So go to design, those things disappear. You go to prototype, and this little dot appears, right? Super cool, super helpful. You can grab that dot and just drag it to wherever you want it to go. So if you start on phase 1, should be phase 2. That's a mistype on my part. Boop. All right, there we go. So when we start here, we drag this to here. That creates a link between these 2 screens. Each one of these is a frame that has some elements in it. Very, very simple. So we're gonna, oh, I know why. That's because it thinks there's 2 of them. Hello. Go here. There we go. So the default, when you create a prototyping link, it goes to on click. It'll probably show up as instant. This panel here is how you're going to tell Figma how to do that transition, right? So we're just going to play around with this a little bit. Let's make that nose go the other way. There we go. So that instant transition from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, on click, instant. And then we're going to play that animation. I'm going to loop this so we can go back to the beginning. There we go. Super simple. You guys following along here, how you grab that dot and drag it to where you want to go. There's a dot for every element. So those don't stay on screen automatically. The only one that's on screen automatically is for the entire frame. So this trigger is on click. That's clicking anywhere in the screen. If I were to set this as the trigger, then it's clicking on this particular element. I'm not going to do that though for now. So there's a few different ways to get from the screen to the preview screen. We're going to look at one over here. There's this flow name, and when you click on a frame and you go up into the prototyping tab, you see flow starting point. So you can obviously rename that by clicking on it. We can call this flow 1. We can call this Dancy Face, whatever we want to call it. But that's just going to have a name for this flow, and there's a few different flows. You'll see a couple of them around. So from this flow name here, we've called it Dancy Face. You can click on the play button here, or in the toolbar up top, you can go to this play button all the way on the right, and you can click that as well. Now, I caution you not to just click that from anywhere, because that's going to pick one of them. That's not accurate. You'll have to choose what flow you start from. So what you do, you click on this first frame where you want to start and then launch from here, or what I prefer is to click from here in this little tag here. That stays as long as you're in the prototyping tab. That stays, and you can click. I can start this one. I can start this one. Wherever we want to, we can start. If you click on the frame, obviously you can click there as well to launch this, but you notice that this turns blue to show that this is the frame that's highlighted if you launch from this top right. It's cool to be able to do that. I recommend launching from this tab just because it's more precise. Selected or unselected, does not matter. That's going to launch in a brand new tab here, so you can easily go back and forth between the 2. It'll probably look odd, like it's zoomed in, so hit Z to zoom out, zoom to fit. And since we set those 3 transitions, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 back to 1, on click as a trigger and as an instant switch, boom, 1, 2, and I click 3, and back to 1, right? I don't know why that didn't go great. Let's do that again. Instant, try that again. There we go. 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 back to 1. There we go. 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 back to 1. So if you're showing off your screens to your stakeholders, you've designed these beautiful interfaces, and you've got 1, and then if a user clicks on this button, it goes to 2, and then you click on this other button, it goes to 3, instant, instant, instant. Super cool, very helpful. Now we're going to start playing with this and make this come alive a little bit. So we're going to click on this arrow, and that is going to bring up this little interaction details. On click is going to be our trigger for now. We're going to go to animation and show you what dissolve looks like. I'm only going to do that on one of them so you can see what the difference is. Z to zoom to fit. Now you click, it dissolves, click instant, and click again back to instant. Dissolve, instant, instant. What dissolve is doing is it's starting with the first one, fading that out, fading in the second one, instead of just this is here, now this is here, now this is here, here, and then fading them both, and then fading back. So we're going to hit R to restart the animation. Now we're going to change that up again. This is where it gets really fun. You see this arrow, you click on that to edit, to bring up the interaction details. You can also click here and bring up the interaction detail. Whoop, that's not it. Interaction details here by clicking there. And then under animation, go to dissolve, and we're going to switch that to smart animate. There's lots of different types of animations, pushing in, sliding in, moving out, moving things around. Really cool, play with those. The one I like to use most is smart animate. Smart animate is really helpful, and you're going to see why in just a second. So we're going to take this one, make that a smart animate as well. We take this one, make that a smart animate. Now we're going to launch this again. Watch what happens. Remember, we had 1, 2, fade in, a nice crossfade, crossfade, crossfade. This time, the items actually move. What Figma is doing underneath the hood is it's looking at all 3 of these. We're going to actually put these in order because I'm going to practice what I preach here. There we go. So what they have is face 1 has eyebrow, nose, and mouth. Face 2 has eyebrow, nose, and mouth. And face 3 has eyebrow, nose, and mouth, right? So Figma is looking at what layers have the same exact name, looking at the parameters of the first one, looking at the parameters of the second one, and animating a smooth transition from one to the other. What it's looking at here for eyebrow to eyebrow to eyebrow, this eyebrow is changing position, and then changing position again, and changing back, and it's basically creating all the intermediary steps between the two. Now you can do all kinds of different things. You can change the color here, going back to our design tab, clicking on the fill color, and we'll just choose something that's different from where we are. And we can change all kinds of things. So option shift to grow from the center and in a uniform way, so it keeps the same proportions. And we can launch that animation again. I can do this from the design tab or the prototype tab. That's what this little button is for. Click on the frame we want to start with, launch that animation. Now it's going to fade, sizing, color, positioning. All the parameters you change are going to fade from one to the other. Sorry, not fade. They're going to actually transition and do the different, all the intermediary steps. So this didn't just appear as red. It did a fade from that gray to that red along the movement path, and this changed size as well. So Smart Animate is changing all the parameters from the same layer names to other things. Now watch what happens if I take this and I'll change this to Rudolph. We're going to go to here, click our prototyping tab to get our preferred launch method. It's going to do the Smart Animate for everything with the same layer name, and then it's just going to do a nice crossfade for all the things that are there before, because to Figma, there's a layer called nose, and then there isn't a layer called nose on the second one, so it's just going to disappear that. And there's a layer called Rudolph that doesn't exist on the first one, does exist on the second one, it's just going to fade that in, right? It's going to fade that right back out. If you change this right back to nose, Command R to change the, to rename, we're going to make this nose again, and zoom to fit, and it does that Smart Animate right back. Super nice. I dig it.
All right, quick question from the audience.
Absolutely.
Someone asked, what did you mean by changing parameters?
Changing parameters. Okay, so what I meant by parameters there is like this, the positioning of this element. So whether that's you know, the size of it, the angle of it, the color of it, those are all parameters. So if I'm changing those parameters, this is going from, let's look at the design tab. So we're going to look at here, 0 degrees. This one has a negative 13.78 degree change. So that's different from 0. So it's going to automatically go 0 degrees, -1, -2, -3, -13 over the time that we set. And we're going to go over times and easing in a second. Does that answer your question? Makes sense. Cool. Love it. All right, moving on. So easing. Easing is how you tell Figma how to do the animation. And we're going to talk about it. So prototype. We've got right here, we've got an on-click smart animate, and then we've got these easing curves right here, ease in and out. I'm going to set it to custom so we can look at this easing curves and talk about what they are. So this y-axis here is from the beginning of the animation to the end of the animation. So beginning to end, and then the x-axis is from the beginning. The y is beginning position to the end position, and the x-axis is beginning time to end time, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's 800 milliseconds, whether it's 8,000 milliseconds. That's an 8-second transition, but it's all percentages, right? So the beginning is the beginning of the animation. This is the end position at the end time, right? So what this curve represents is it starts its amount of change pretty slowly, and then it ramps up the speed of change in the middle and then slows that down to come to a nice stop. There's all kinds of different shapes in your easing curve. So your ease in, we'll bring up that custom again, starts slow and zooms to its position, which is nice if you're starting on screen and zooming off screen. And we're going to talk about why. So physics. Our brains were developed to exist in a real world where things like gravity and inertia and friction exist, right? So there's all kinds of stuff that your mind inputs through touch and smell and taste and sight and hearing, or any combination of a few or many or more than those. And your brain looks at all this information and figures out what's going on in the world. And it's calibrated to real objects, which do have to deal with time and weight and inertia and friction and things like that that exist in physics. In a digital screen, it's representations of all those things. So we're going to set this easing curve to be, we're going to set this to a linear curve. So bring up the custom. It just starts same amount of distance and time, just in a straight line. So it starts here, it ends here, right? The most logical way to get from point A to point B. We're going to look at what happens in our brains when it does that. Oh God, it's set to 8 seconds. All right, sorry. So we're going to change this right back to 650 milliseconds, just over half a second. We're going to launch that again. Z to fit. And now it feels unnatural. It feels like a weird mechanistic, like, right, R to reset. It feels, I mean, it's cool. It moves. It does move. But look what happens when we change this up a little bit. We're going to change this to ease in and out. So if we're looking at custom and you think of like a stone, right? You have to push really hard at the beginning to get it to start moving. Once it's moving, it's pretty easy, but then you got to pull back on it again to get it to stop. So this represents, it's a push to get it started, it gets going, and then you slow it down. Watch that, zoom to fit, right? It feels more real, and we can slow it down so that it feels like it takes the same amount of time. Cool thing about this is that it automatically picks up those changes. So you don't have to relaunch it every time. But watch this. It feels like an object that goes, just feels a little bit more smooth. Yeah, it does feel more real. Yeah, I see you, Sherry. Thank you. Sound effects are part of the experience. Absolutely. So as we play with these different easing curves, we can make it feel different ways. If we want this thing to like ramp up and get off screen as fast as possible, let's say this object here, we don't need to see it stop. So we're going to shift, we're going to click and then shift so that it's in a 90-degree angle, so it's not moving off center. And then we're going to hold spacebar so that I can move this thing off screen and have it stay inside of that frame. We're going to change this easing curve to ease in. It's kind of funny because you want to use an ease in curve to move things off screen, an ease out curve to move things on screen. Go right back here and we're going to show you. It just kind of dips off screen really fast. And then you can change how fast you want that to happen. Maybe we want to make that happen twice as fast. So 400 milliseconds, reset, and just dips off screen. You don't notice necessarily that it's ramping up its speed and then stopping off screen, but you don't need to. It just looks like the thing moves off screen. And what we want in situations like this is that you don't notice that it's weird, right? There's all kinds of stuff happening to trick your brain into thinking that this is a physical object that's moving. So we set these easing curves, and then you can also play with these handles. So I'm going to really exaggerate this, bring that back with the R key, and it just feels different. It's like, and you can play with that to get the feel you want. And that's why it says attitude right here. Because things are things, physics exists, our digital interfaces are things that are happening. I mean, people do exist as a digital physical hybrid creature, but that's a whole nother topic. What we want to think about is attitude. How do we want our items on screen to perform? So in this case, it's dipping off screen like that. So we launch this, zoom to fit, just getting out of there, right? Another thing we can do is, let's zoom out a little bit so we can see both screens, and we'll bring our friend back. And gonna bring that back on screen to there. We're gonna start this guy off screen holding spacebar so that I'll just show you without spacebar. So if I click and shift, when it gets outside of that frame, it's gonna not be part of this anymore, and now it's in a different frame, so undo. But if I hold spacebar, I can move this out here and still inside of this frame, right? So we're gonna set that easing. We're gonna set that to zoom out. And what that does, looking at the custom field again, is it starts fast and then it slows down to a nice stop. Like pulling up to a red light, nice and smooth. So we're gonna launch that, zoom to fit, and R to reset, right? It's like it hurries to get on screen and then stops nicely. And we can play with those easing curves as well and make it stop a little smoother, right? Different feels, but it's the same general thing. So that's easing curves. We've got from the beginning of the animation to the end of the animation, and then from the beginning of time of the animation to the end of time of the animation. And you can set things to bounce by going past the end of the animation and then coming back. So you can play with all kinds of fun things like that. Just because I feel whimsical, I'm going to show you that. Shpoing. Right? You see that? Cool. Any questions before we move on? Difference between shift and spacebar. Okay, so they do completely different things. Shboing. Yeah, so shift is going to keep your items moving on the x-axis or the y-axis and not like randomly in different places. So it's really good for keeping things aligned. And so I'll show you that really quick and then we'll move on. If I create a rectangle out here, boom. All right, so I can click this and drag it and move around all I want. And now when I click shift, now I'm holding shift, now it's only on this y-axis or x-axis from the original position. So if I create two of these, holding option to duplicate and shift to keep it in line, these are still lined up. If I didn't do that and hold shift and just hold option, now they can be off like that, which is helpful for different situations. Now if I hold shift, it's in either the Y plane or the X plane, not both. So I can't move on a diagonal. So that's where shift is really helpful. And then what Spacebar does is it allows me to grab this item. And so if I'm moving it without shift and just Spacebar, I can move around like this. I can move it off screen, and that keeps it as part of this frame. So now it's over here. If I let go of shift, now it's out here, not as part of that frame, right? So I'm going to undo that. So we keep this all together. Does that make sense? Yeah, it moves it keeps it outside of the frame. So if this, I've grabbed this square and move it here, now it's in this frame. But if I just wanted to float over top and not be part of that frame, maybe because it's in a larger frame and it's like a two things on the same page kind of thing, this is now still separate from this. So it keeps like the frame that it's in. Yeah, it keeps it outside of the frame or inside of the frame, and it helps you float things. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Cool. So I set a trigger here. We've been working with this, just clicking anywhere on the frame, but I set this easing to also be a trigger. So now I'm going to show you some cool stuff. Boing. Show and tell. Whee! Cool. All right. So right here, this is what we're going to make today. We've got this screen here, this recruited already leads for you, an inbox, and an inbox with one of the options opened up. So this is a fictitious company that does not exist, that we created just for the sake of making a thing to show. Their goal is to pair people with jobs that are good for them. So you do all the profile stuff, whatever, sign up with them, they know what you want, and then they feed leads to your inbox. So you open up your app, you've got an inbox here with a bunch of different leads that match your job preferences, and then you can open up and look at them, apply them, add them to favorites list, yada, yada, yada. So what we're going to do today, we're going to animate this transition from this splash screen. We're going to click on go to dashboard, open up, I should change that to inbox, I guess. But go to inbox, and then we're going to open this up as a nice accordion. Before we get started, does anybody have questions? All right, cool. I'm going to show you guys what we're building today. So click. Ooh. Oh. All right, and so we can close that. Restart it. Click. These things all come in. Expand that. Ooh. Ah. All right. So that's what we're going to build. These screens are not connected in any way. So I want to connect them. What I want to do is go to prototype, click on this little dot, drag it to the next screen, click on the next screen, click this little dot, drag it to the next screen, click on this first one, not for real life, but for making our lives easier for the sake of this demo, and just link it back to the first one. So click, 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 click to go around in circles. Now, these should automatically show up as an instant transition on click. Instant transition, I'm changing it, and I will explain why it's not showing up that way for me, but probably is showing that way for you. When we launch this, we click, click, click. Super cool. We've designed this screen, blah, blah, blah. We talked about, we're using this Shopify Polaris design system, so that informs the color of our buttons, which matches with our brand colors, which is great. We've got our name and a sweet tagline, which we got from marketing. Thank you very much. They click on their dashboard. It opens up their inbox, which shows all of their leads, which is super cool. You can even do that a little bit, which is great. And then they can open up one of their things, and it will show a little thing, and you can apply, blah, blah, blah. Super fun, super functional, but doesn't have a whole lot of pizzazz. So we are going to spice it up a little bit. One quick way we could do that is go from instant to dissolve. And I'm going to set that easing to ease in and out. Ease in and out is like my standard. That's where I start. It's great. We're going to set that to dissolve for now. Ease in and out, because from there, it mimics physics a little bit, and you can make your adjustments. So R to reset. Now it fades a little bit, adds a little bit of motion, makes it feel like one thing is leading into another. Pretty cool. right? But it's not quite alive. It still feels like we've got two different screens. So, we can set them to feel like they slide. You got a push animation. So it feels like we've got like a slideshow kind of situation going on, which is cool. Yeah, that's cool too. But just like Dissolve, it's not really feeling alive. So how do we make it feel alive? The first thing we want to do is we want to take all the elements from this screen and we're going to copy them. And we're going to click on the second screen and we're going to paste them. Right? So now we've got these pasted on here. If we do a smart animate, it's going to say all the parameters from this screen to these same elements that exist on the next screen are going to just animate from one to the next, right? So we can grab all of these and we can shift spacebar, move them off screen. And now when we go to here, we're going to reset ourselves to smart animate. And we're going to change this to smart animate. And we're going to save ourselves a headache later by doing all of them right now. Smart animate, perfect. And then we're going to launch this, R to reset. And now it feels like one comes in and the other one kind of dips off screen. One dips off screen and the other one zooms in. So we want to give that a little bit of personality. So we are going to, where are you? And button, select, and bring those back on screen. I know that they are centered, so we're just going to center them. But this is where holding shift is helpful because now we're not accidentally moving north-south. They're just going east-west. So we want to give these a little bit of personality. We're going to go back to the design tab, recruited already. That's the main thing, right? That's the guy that leads everything. That's a brand name. That's the thing that drives all of these changes for all these clients. So we're going to have that lead the animation. That's going to be the first thing to move. Then what do we want people to be left with? We want them to be left with our logo. So we're going to bump that to the right a little bit. This leads for you is another thing we want them to remember, but not quite as much as the logo, because anywhere they are in the world, they'll see the logo and be like, ooh, recruiter already, great, we love that. So this leads the charge. This stays on screen. They remember this. And then the last thing that we want is for their action to feel like is making all the change. So these things will exit. The button that they clicked will disappear, and then it'll load up the next screen. So we're going to have that one bump way off to the side there. And now, as we do the smart animate, these are all going to move at different times. The reason that that's going to happen is because everything happens in Figma in the same amount of time. So we're going to set an amount of time for this animation to take place, but these objects are going to move different distances over that set amount of time. So if, say, 1 second, we're not going to use 1 second, it's faster to say that. If over 1 second, a thing is moving this much versus really far, they're going to seem to go at different speeds. So now we have this animation set this way. R to reset. It was too fast. Let's slow it down a little bit. Go back to prototype. Click this. 400 milliseconds. Let's slow it way down to 800 milliseconds. Bring it right back. Reset. Boom. Now you can see the name sort of leads the charge, but maybe a little bit more. So let's go to the second screen. RA inbox condensed. We're just going to take this name, bump it out to the side a little bit more. We're going to take this button, bump it back a little bit more. And then we're going to select all of them. Oh, shift select and move all of them off screen. And now we're going to look at that just to see. Now it's emphasized that motion and emotion of what's happening. These are all happening on a subtle level. People aren't going to see like, oh, it's wiggly. This means that this thing is most important. This is the last action we took, like all that. You're not going to think that on a conscious level, but you're going to put the impression of our brand and all of our things that we're creating in a subconscious level of the mind, which is helpful. So now we're going to take the second screen we're going to grab everything inside of it, all these things. So when we go to from the splash screen to this inbox, some things disappear and some things appear on screen. So we don't want them to just fade in because that's cool, but doesn't have a lot of personality. So we're going to copy, Command C to copy, and we're going to click on RA splash, Command V to paste. Now, what we want to pay attention to is layer ordering. You want to try as best you can to keep the same layer order in the same place. It's not always an issue. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but if there's like weird glitches and things are fading weird and it doesn't quite make sense why, and all your layers are named right, your timing is set and it's still kind of weird, sometimes it's a layer order is switching. And so the computer is trying to do a bunch of things at once. I couldn't tell you all the behind the scenes like backend stuff of why it's doing that, but sometimes it matters. So try to keep your layers in the same order so it doesn't have to change layer orders as part of those transition fades that it's doing. Right. So for now, we're going to grab these. We're going to disappear them by clicking on the eyeball that shows up next to their name when you hover. So looking at your layer, you hover over it, you got a lock and an eyeball. Great. So what do we want to happen? We want these two, the top bar and the system bar, to disappear off screen. We want this tab navigation to disappear off screen. And let's just look at that. That looks great, right? The reason that we didn't see any of these other things change is because we've got them hidden on the first layer and they are off screen in the second layer. So if we reset now, we see them. That's great. These things appear and that's pretty cool. But let's give it even more personality. So these two items, the system bar and the top bar, instead of having them kind of just slide in like this, let's try to make a sort of accordion animation. I think that could be really cool. So let's do it. We're going to take undo action, bring all those back. All right. So now we're going to take this bar only, the system bar, and drop that off screen. And then we're going to take this top bar and drop this off screen. Now, since they are both going to the same position and taking the same amount of time to move different distances, it's going to look like they are like kind of, well, you'll see how sort of accordions on screen, which I think is pretty cool. So let's move those off screen a little bit further. We're going to take this system bar and actually we're going to take this top bar, move that a little bit further, and just to exaggerate that animation. Now you're feeling how they kind of all accordion out. And remember that, because we're going to do that a bunch of different times in a bunch of different ways. So this is going to disappear off screen. That's wonderful. And now we're going to take a look at this part here. We're going to do exactly that same accordion thing. And how do we want to do that, right? So my feeling, right, is that when we build things, we build from the ground up. So we'll build one, the next one, and the third one, we'll have them kind of stack their way in. This is just a choice that I made because I think it's cool. You should never make things because you like it. You should always have a reasoning for them. 2, 3, 4. But when you get to this point in the screens, a lot of times people will have already made these decisions. And you will be able to either just follow directions or, oh my gosh, or defend why you made that choice, right? So the animation for the first one, it's thinking about how things are moving in space, what's most important. The second one, similarly, we could start in the middle and have it kind of come in as a V. You could start at the top and work its way down like it's unfurling a sign that's folded up, or we can build from the bottom like rocks. And I like rocks, so we're going to do it that way. 1, 2, 3, 4. But for any product, you might want to think about why you're doing any type of action specifically and be able to defend that, explain your thinking, and be willing to change if other people decide that they want to do things differently. So now we've staggered all these things. They are going to move different distances, so it's going to take different amounts of time to get to the final position. So we're going to grab this scrolling cards frame, we're going to click, shift, spacebar, drag that right off screen to there. And we're going to make these reappear. Now when we go to our animation, reset, it looks like this guy. All this other stuff is off screen. And when we click, now it's got a little bit of staggered motion. Explain rocks and why I like rocks. I like rocks because we live on a planet that is made of rocks. And I think that's neat. But you can't stack a rock you don't start building with a roof and build to the foundation. You start at the foundation and build your way up to the ceiling, right? I want all of these to go a little bit slower. So I'm going to dip them off screen. We're going to take this tab nav a little bit further. So what I'm doing now is I'm increasing the distances that things have to go in the same amount of time. Slightly different than having the amount of time itself adjusted. They achieved very similar things. And I don't think you need to worry about the difference quite yet, but that feels a little better to me. I might increase the distances here, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to finesse it right now. So we've got this first animation where the stuff disappears. The second thing comes on screen. Now we're going to start messing with these elements here. Same principles apply though. Absolutely the same principles apply. So what we're going to do is we're going to command click and then shift click that, shift click this. Shift is just clicking multiple things at once. And we're going to copy those, Command C. We're going to jump into this Fender Guitars card here, drop that menu down, open up assets and row. We're going to open up header and body, and we're going to drop those in. We're going to click on label, Command V, and then move them below label there to keep the order the same. That looks like a whole mess, but what we're going to do is we're going to grab Fender text. We're going to drag that up to the top here. We're going to drag button apply and button faves at the same time, and drag those up to the top here. If we didn't do any of that movement, when the thing opens, they would just sort of fade in, which is cool, that works. But now we've got all of these things here. We're gonna wanna take pass through, set it to 0. So now instead of just fading in at this point, so what we have here, the difference between these two in the position of this card is it gets taller. All of these, UX Wizards, HelloFresh, Calendly, all that stuff, that moves down, southward in on the screen in position. So the fade here, the Smart Animate fade, those things move down. This background box opens up, and then these objects can fade in. But since we had the accordion animation with these, the top bar and the system bar, we want that same accordion animation to start to build some familiarity with the product right here. So we got similar things happening at the same time. And then instead of clicking anywhere on the page, let's go command click on that expand button. And we're going to drag that right over here. So now the trigger isn't just the entire screen. It's that specifically that expand button, because if you click on a different button, you'd want to expand something else. So we've got our Smart Animate. We'll play with the time another time. We're going to change this to say close. So now the parameters that are going to change are the shape of these letters from expand to the shape of the word close. So that's going to crossfade. These items are going to crossfade their positioning. So it's going to start up and it's going to slide down. They're going to also crossfade their opacity. Right now we have it set to 0% opacity and it's going to fade to 100% opacity. So all those things happening at the same time tell your eye that this pretty cool looking animation looks like that. So in order to set this trigger here, we're going to go to prototyping tab, select that item, that dot appears, or we can go to prototyping tab first, then click the item, the dot appears again, and move that back here. Now, this Smart Animate, all the parameters from the previous animation settings, the interaction details from the previous animation that you created, when you create the next one, it's just going to copy those over. So I've created this ease in and out, 800 milliseconds. Let's say I want to change that to 200 milliseconds to make it really fast. Now I want to say this button is the trigger. If I create another animation, now look, this 200 milliseconds, it's copied that same parameter from the previous animation into the next one. Right, that's really helpful because if you just want things to bounce back and forth, it takes the same amount of time. That's pretty great. So now I've got this close button here, closes right up. Oh, that's still at 200, what I think is too fast. Let's set that to 800, which is probably too slow, but for the sake of showing it off, it looks good. That's pretty good. Now, one last fancy thing that we're going to change in the last 5 minutes is these, as they fade, kind of sit on top of, or technically behind, but they mesh with the Fender guitars and the Experience Designer role and create a little bit of dissonance as it's fading. And this is such a detailed thing, but I think it's important. So we're going to zoom in here. We're going to look at this background, go to the Design tab. We're going to see that the fill is pure white, which is helpful because we don't need to really remember anything other than that pure white is FFFFFFFFFFF. So we're going to create a rectangle. Create a rectangle that just covers that area. We're going to change the fill to hit F a bunch of times. And then we're going to send it to behind this label that says Experience Design, but in front of all those other things, right? So we're going to rename that rectangle so we know what the heck we're looking at in our layers. And we'll call this BG screen. And then we're going to copy that. Actually, we're not going to copy it yet. And I'll tell you why. So, well, it's easier if I show you. Copy that, go to here, double click, open that up. Header body, there we go. Click on Fender text, paste to put it right above it. Now, those things won't clash, but we've got this weird sharp line that shows that we put a screen back there. It works fine. It's functional. That's great. If you're pressed for time, don't worry about it. But what I like to do, I'm going to delete this out of here and then go right into here, grab that BG screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Effects, put a drop shadow. I'm going to go to the details of that drop shadow, make it white, 100%. Actually, so I can see it, I'm going to make it black or like whatever random amount of colors. And I'm going to blur that out. Move that just a little bit so that the edge is meshed with that, and I'm going to change it back to my color of the, when I say my color, I mean the background of this item. And it's clashing a little bit with this divider line, so maybe bring it back a little bit so that divider line reappears. Perfect. And now I'm going to copy and jump right back into here, put it right above Fender text. And now, this little trick of the trade, boom, it's got a little bit of a fade. So it's not enough to change the experience of what's happening, but it's enough so that you don't necessarily notice it. So tiny little things like that make a difference. And now, instead of noticing like, oh man, what is this, like duplicating text over text, we're seeing, oh, that's a pretty cool opening animation. I could do another one like that right behind this text block here. But for the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. In order to make this animation here, what we're just going to do, we're going to duplicate this. There's one, there's two, and now we're going to go into, normally what I do is drop right into the colors section of the Shopify Polaris, right? So hopefully you've downloaded that before. You might not have it if you weren't here for last week, which is okay. You can just grab your color and change it a little bit. But I'm going to go to the specific color that they recommend. So for actions, we've got that green button. We're going to call that press. We're going to grab this color, copy and paste, jump over here, change this button background to the darker version. And we're going to change this prototyping animation, delete what's there, and then go to this one. Since this isn't the beginning anymore, we're going to delete that flow starting point. We're going to delete this flow starting point and delete this animation. Now, we're going to take this and we're going to show you the duplicating the parameters, right? So change this from smart animate to instant. And we're going to have that on click. And it just instantly jumps to this one. And then now we're going to take this and it goes from instant. But instead of having to click again, we want after delay, we're going to set it really fast. So like 50 milliseconds. So it's going to click, it'll turn this dark and then it'll turn light again. And then after delay again, well, we didn't have to change it because it remembered all these parameters, which is good. But then we want to change this to after delay of 50 milliseconds again. So now you click here, it animates to this, it animates to that, and then it does the transition that we set up before. Super cool. Grab that. Now, oh. So this on click actually is not what we want. We want this button on click. There we go. Instant, navigate to, yeah. Now let's try it. Now this button is clickable, click, and everything happens. All right, that was a lot really fast. I don't expect you to necessarily have absorbed everything really quickly. What I want you to have done, hopefully, is to gotten a taste of some of the things we think about as we're creating these animations. Before we jump into the next segment, which is going to be very fast because we're at time, what questions do any of you have? Does Figma do anything to make it easy for developers to recreate these animations when actually building the app? That is a great question. Let's look at inspect. It looks like it's just doing pieces of things. Let's look here. You know, that's a great question. And here we go. Interactions. It looks like yes. Gives the CSS code. Yep.